Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. This is the July edition of WaddsCon. I'm going to just let people join over the next minute or so before we kick off. You can see here's the lineup for today. We've got Paul Clarke, who's going to talk about the value of images and photography, Shayoni Lynn about behavioural science and PR, Naomi Jones about ESG and what that means in practice, and then Nigel Sarbutts talking about freelancing and the freelance market at the moment. And we're expecting about 150 people today, so I'm just going to let people continue to join, and we'll kick off in a minute or so. As ever, if please say hello in the chat. Typically the chat's quite lively. I'll pick out questions from the chat and from the discussion as we go along to put to each of the speakers. Each of the speakers will speak for 5 minutes or so, and then we'll have a Q&A with each of them for 10 minutes. Also, say hello on Twitter, hashtag WaddsCon. There's typically a lively following there as well. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and say hello. Thank you for joining today. This is WaddsCon July. It's our sixth event. I'm joining you from my houseboat on the Thames in London. As ever, please say hello in the chat or on Twitter, hashtag WaddsCon. Thanks to everyone that paid for a ticket today. That donation's gone to my local food bank. It enables us to my firm Wadding to contribute around 500 quid a month to the food bank. That's really important to me. Today we're joined by colleagues. We're going to talk about the photography and the value of an image. We're going to talk about the opportunity for behavioural science in public relations. We've got a practical case study of ESG, and then a rough guide to freelancing in PR. If you've attended before, you'll know the format is really simple. Each speaker will speak for about 5 minutes or so, followed by a discussion. As ever, drop comments in the chat or on Twitter, hashtag WaddsCon. So our first speaker, I'm delighted to be joined by Paul Clarke. He's a natural born storyteller and craftsperson. Photography and the visual arts are his media. He's transformed his business during the pandemic from shooting, I think, 300 events or so a year to working with the moving image and adapting for the lockdown environment. He's an old friend, and I'm delighted that he's here today to talk about the value of an image. Paul, hello, thanks for joining.
Hi, thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to get my little slide thing up, and hopefully
I will switch to transcription on.
Are we good to go?
You're good to go, thank you.
All right, so hello everybody, I'm Paul Clarke, I'm a photographer. A lot of us use images, and a lot of us use them commercially and professionally and for our clients. And we put a lot of thought into how powerful they are, what we really want from them. But how much do we actually understand what sits behind the value of an image? So yeah, I did take that picture you see at the moment now, and it turned out to be quite valuable. I'm going to kick us off with a little quiz. So here's a picture. And I'm going to get you to guess in your heads how much you think the missing number is there. How much was earned for this picture in 1 year? Okay, little snap taken by an iPhone at Sandringham, the Royals. And the answer is £40,000. That's quite an expensive image. You've seen this one this week, because this is a news story from 2 days ago on the BBC. The Parliamentary Portrait set is a very famous set of photos. And how much do you think each of that photo, how much do you think that photo of Ken Clarke cost Parliament to do? £16. And believe it or not, that was seen as an extraordinarily extravagant waste of public money, because if you multiply £16 by 600 MPs, you get 10,000 quid. And 10,000 quid is a crazy amount to spend on photography. And in truth, part of what we have here is that none of us really value photography, not internally, quite a lot of the time. The last time you needed a picture of Niagara Falls for a presentation, you just went and got one, didn't you? Hoping nobody would catch you, because it's not really worth it. Yeah. So this is my world of value in images. Now, this one is the HSBC Airbridge campaign. You remember it from the airports 10 years ago. And the picture there of the shiitake mushroom farm and a massive pile of bullshit was taken by me. And how much do you think I've got paid for that image for licensing for a global campaign? I'm not going to tell you exactly how much, but let's say 5 figures. Okay, so a huge amount of money. And the reason I throw those in for you now is because we're in a world of weirdness when it comes to value and imagery. Rules are bent and twisted all the time. You can hire somebody to produce 200 images of a big event, and you might be paying £3, £5 per image. And you might think, actually, that was quite an expensive photographer. Conversely, if you want that absolutely golden image for a huge ad campaign, as you can see, we're going into 5 figures. So we're in a world where value isn't straightforward. There's a lot of guesswork. There's a lot of uncertainty. You can enter sort of almost strangely perverse relationships with value of an image. So let's say you come to me and want a new headshot. I will love to do that. And I will propose to you a small number of hundreds of pounds to do that. Now, imagine that you're Tom Cruise and you're in town for the Olympics, and you come to me and say, actually, Paul, I've seen your stuff on the internet. I'd really like a new headshot. How much do you think I'm going to charge Tom Cruise if I'm going to have the rights to distribute what will be an exclusive set of images to Tom that might be in quite demand? You can see how the numbers start. I might end up paying Tom to take his picture. So traditional relationships of money and value and expense go a bit strange when we get into the world of imagery. And I tell you this because sometimes when you're commissioning a photographer for a PR campaign, something similar like that, you might get into strange territory about stuff like rights. In 5 minutes, I can't even scratch the surface of the complexity of image rights and how copyright works and who's allowed to use pictures for what reason and what risks there are. I will just say, though, that if you ever get a reaction from a photographer saying, actually, no, the copyright of those images isn't included in the job that we're doing for PR purposes, then there's kind of a good reason for that. And the reason is the total bullshit that you see there. In some circumstances, an image can have a life and a value which radically outstrips the small number of hundreds of pounds that a PR shoot is going to cost you to do. So I say that because I think it's better that we all get open with understanding value relationships, how exchange works, how markets work in this really, really strange territory. And the best advice I've got for you to leave you with is if you're thinking about using images, you're thinking about licensing, wondering how to budget for it, pick up the phone and talk to a photographer or email a photographer, because we will happily talk through the issues, tell you how we see it, how the market sees it, and get to a point which is fair and equitable for everybody. So ideally avoiding surprises around, oh, I didn't know we couldn't use it for that, or what do you mean it can't go on a book jacket without another license? So let's be more open about this stuff. Let's talk to each other and talk to photographers. You can find some other stories of mine around imagery on my blog there. My site is at pcfo.to, and obviously Twitter and Instagram, Paul_Clarke. I think that's 5 minutes.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paul. Do you want to come back on screen? Paul, talk to me about how photography has been commoditized and the internet and stock photography.
Yeah, so obviously there's always, since at the point at which the internet first appeared, suddenly we have an image access base which everybody can reach. Whether they do it legally or nicely or politely or with appropriate payment is another matter. And as I said, certainly the first time I saw the internet, it was fill your boots with whatever you wanted. We had also with the internet, the mass democratization. So an awful lot more people supplying reasonably usable image quality and putting them into libraries. So put those two together and you see a stock market that is a state of weirdness. You have sites like, I'll name them. You have Unsplash, the site where the government famously took an image of a ballerina last year to use in a campaign, probably even this year. Massively controversial, free image for use there, got them into terrible trouble because, of course, they'd done none of the work around rights and permissions and whether it was appropriate to use a young girl in Atlanta to push a government careers campaign. None of that happened. So that's at one end. At the other end, we have, the Gettys and the Shutterstocks, and they're still regularly charging small numbers of hundreds of pounds per picture. So massively rich and complex and textured picture, but let's be honest, you get what you pay for. If you're going to go for something free, lots of other people are going to be using it. If you want something that's yours to use for a defined set of purposes, talk to a photographer, commission some work, and for the price of a really good lunch for one of your CEOs, you're actually going to be getting a library that's yours.
Price of a lunch, I like that. What about there's a truism in PR that everyone thinks they can write. You share a document and everyone will come back with reviews and comments, irrespective of the training and skills in writing. Same with photography, right? We've all got iPhones. We all think we can shoot.
And we can all get one picture at one time that is press standard, that is publication standard, all of us. But can we do it, as the famous footballer said, on a wet Tuesday night in Stoke? Can you do it wherever you're required to turn up? Can you do it under pressure in 2 minutes with Royal Protection Officers surrounding you, with PRs pushing you around? Can you deliver? And the job of the professional is always to deliver. We don't have excuses. So I agree absolutely that the kit and the technology enables lots of people to do lots of pictures. But if you want to be assured, I often say I don't sell photos. I sell assurance that the job will be done as well as it can be done. So that's what you're paying for.
You're back out snapping after lockdown. You're doing events again?
Yeah, a few. I've only done one event this year, and it was the Oscars ceremony. So they did a London Oscars show linked up live with LA, and I've been shooting for the Academy for a while. So it was nice to get to do something really high profile. But yeah, events not so much at the moment. Lots of portraiture and lots of on a personal level. It's really a lot of people have come out of lockdown looking older and tired and with strain on them. And there's some really sensitive conversations at the moment about how you bring people back with their image, how you reconnect people with what they are, who they are, what they look like now. Lots of grey hair, lots more wrinkles. So yeah, it's a nice time. I'm doing a lot of portraiture, and I'm having a lot of caring and sensitive conversations with people about what's their look now.
That's a really interesting point. So yeah, we're all a bit heavier and all a bit tighter and older. Wow, you've silenced everyone.
Oh, no questions from the floor. Sorry.
No. There's a debate ongoing about using stock photography, using image libraries. You're not a fan of image libraries, are you?
Well, no, they've got their place. They've absolutely got their place. But again, I put the costs into proportion. If you're agonizing over a small number of hundreds of quid for something as an enterprise, which you're putting collectively your client's corporate efforts and your corporate efforts into the tune of 10, 20, 30 grand, then you probably should look at your priorities again. If you really, and it comes back to this thing though, as I said, my challenge to you is I suspect all of you deep down have a little part of you that says images aren't really worth anything. It's the constant battle for me in my industry to confront that. But we chiv and we balk at £200 or £300 for a picture. So yeah, in my view, I think it's a small stuff that gets sweated too much, and you should go for something that's quality. It's personal to you, and it's exactly hitting your brief.
Talk to us about creativity. So there's a couple of people asked about the bane of the PR life is grip and grim photography. How do you bring creativity into it?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Certainly at the level that I work at, which is, I guess, medium-sized PR opportunities. So we're not talking huge brand teams with 20 or 30 people in the room directing. It's often up to me and perhaps one client, one PR representative to come up with something. So, I say I'm a photographer, but I'm not. I'm an art director. I'm creative. I'm a consultant on the semiotics of what you're wearing, what's in the background. We always have a chat about representation and diversity and making sure that we're showing, not necessarily trying to diversity wash an event or a team, but certainly giving representation to the world that we would like to see for that organization. So you're getting a lot more there than just, well, let's just take the picture. Yeah, the curse of the rugby team lineup with 5 people in a row with their hands over their groins, always play against that wherever you can. There are ways to use light and energy imaginatively, but I'm just going to stress the energy level. I think lots of photographers will make the technology work and will make the people look okay. A good photographer finds energy in the people, and that's what people see in a photo. I say when you look at a portrait, you generally only see the eyes and the energy. And if you get both of those right in PR stuff, then actually you can get away with all sorts of perhaps more traditional and staid setups around a campaign. You could put the effort in on the day, though, to get the energy.
Paul, you've got a massive fan base here in the chat.
I can't
People
even
loving
look at
your
it.
energy, your honesty, your candor, the idea, the concept of sensitive photography as well. I think you need to go and write a blog about that.
Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah.
But thank you so much for kicking us off and for a really great chat. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Nice.
Cheers, Paul.
All right.
So we're going to say goodbye to Paul. I will circulate a replay of the event and details of how you can connect with all the speakers. But next up, we've got Shayoni Lynn. Shay is a pioneer in the application of behavioural science in public relations. We met during the first lockdown. She leads a fast-growing eponymous agency, Lynn PR, that I support as a non-exec. She's delivering world-class work, helping improve the lives of people and tearing up awards as she goes. Shay, hello.
Hi, gosh, I can't live up to that. Hi, thank you so much for having me. What an absolute blast on a Friday.
Yeah, no, good. Thank you. So you've got some slides you're going to run through?
I'm just going to pop them on now. And if you bear with me.
I'll let you get on with it.
Yeah. Sorry, my computer is a bit slow, so I hope it's not eating into my time. Hi, so my name is Shayoni. Thanks so much, Stephen, for asking me to join today. I'd like to start with just taking you through a few highlights from our campaigns at Lynn PR in the last 12 months. So 805% increase in response rates towards a tenant survey for a housing association, securing 362 responses in 4 weeks. Nearly 132% increase in self-referrals from residents accessing IAPT services for clinical commissioning groups in 8 weeks. A 67% improvement in COVID-19 vaccination rates for a very specific cohort for an integrated care system in 2 weeks. What do these examples have in common other than the fact that Lynn PR ran them? A deep understanding of human behavior and experiments that drive outcomes. At Lynn PR, we're a data-driven behavioral science communications agency. We're a startup, as Stephen said, launched in October 2019. And since then, we've been really fortunate to have delivered a range of campaigns, and our interventions have had real tangible impact. Our campaigns typically generate 5 to 10 times more engagement compared to benchmarks, and sometimes even more. Most importantly, though, they drive organizational outcomes, from getting residents to access key public health services, to creating conversations with tenants, to boosting take-up of life-saving road safety training courses, and improving engagement on difficult topics with employees. I love using this slide. Sorry, it's pretty much in every slide I do. This gentleman, David Halpern, is the chief exec of the Behavioral Insights team, or the Nudge unit. And he says, do we stumble blindly, or do we seek to understand these influences and choices? The answer is we cannot afford to stumble blindly, not anymore. Now more than ever, we need to embrace a data-driven approach to strategic communications and a deep understanding of human behavior. And this is not always about what your audiences do, like engage with you on your social channels or even respond to your calls to action, which is great. But it's about understanding the subconscious motivations and biases that exist in all of us as a species, and the opportunities and challenges that these present, especially to us as communicators. Because the more we understand how our audiences consciously and subconsciously behave, the choices they make and why, the way they perceive content and communications, and the actions they take as a result of it, the better we can then design environments that audiences can thrive in behavioral science that's known as choice architecture. Because I don't think an intuitive understanding of who we are talking to is enough anymore. We must bring the best methods to better understand our audiences and their behaviors into our communications programs, as well as embrace scientific methodology and experimentation and apply this robustly, and this is really important, robustly, not superficially, to our practice. The reality is that there is huge opportunity in applying behavioral science to comms and marketing. It gives us the evidence to scale up ideas and solutions, and in turn gives us so much more confidence in the interventions we propose. It's not just stabbing in the dark, you know something will work before you even activate it. understanding how audiences would react to a potential message or even to a single word is powerful. And as human beings, we take hundreds of mental shortcuts, which are known as heuristics, to make decisions every day. It's called system one thinking. I'm sure you've heard about it. Because as a species, we don't like making decisions, let alone complex decisions. And when we use our system one thinking, so that's our automatic brain, to make these everyday decisions quite instinctively without even realizing we're doing it, what happens is that we give in to cognitive biases. And these are predictable errors that take place when we use heuristics or mental shortcuts to make decisions. And it's about understanding these cognitive biases that can really unlock powerful communications, because you can understand and predict how people will behave before they've even had the opportunity to behave. Because as human beings, we all respond in certain ways to certain stimuli. So that's it from me. Thank you very much. I'll take some questions. Oh, you're on mute. Huh.
Sorry, Shay, I'm back. As ever, if anyone's got any questions, please jump into the chat. Shay, talk us about the relationship with public relations and behavioural science. It's quite a new concept for public relations practice, right?
Yeah, well, yes and no. Obviously, behavioral science can be traced back all the way through to the 18th century. Adam Smith and his models still apply today. Behavioral science has been used robustly in government communications and continues to be so. But yes, the popularization of behavioral science into practice is new. It's emerging. I think people are very attracted by the predictability of it and the sexiness of it. But I think, in terms of robustness of practice, there's still a way to go. I have been absolutely energized by how many people want to learn more, are upskilling themselves. I've heard of colleagues going into master's programs in behavioral science, which is incredible. But yes, I think, where we are as a practice and using behavioral science, I think it's quite introductory. There's widespread awareness of certain frameworks like the East framework because of GCS. However, for example, that framework was created for policy boards, and it's actually quite a introductory framework. It's not nuanced. So I think where we need to go from here, if I may, is better understanding some of those concepts behind those frameworks, understanding human behavior before applying a framework into practice, because otherwise that application isn't robust. It's, again, superficial.
Talk to us about your own journey, because there's quite a few questions about how do we learn more, how do we skill up. We're at Lynn PR, we've got the classic, a couple of blog posts does not make a practitioner. What's your own educational path to
So I've always been clear, I'm not a psychologist, I'm a strat comms professional, I'm an applied behavioral scientist. I was running a very data-driven comms program at Cardiff University, where I was the head of comms for alumni relations and fundraising, and the natural, I suppose, extension of that was behavior and psychology. So I started doing, as we all have done, A/B testing and seeing whether this worked, and that is scratching the surface. So when you actually get into it, it's so much more nuanced. When you're looking at randomized controlled trials, it's so much more nuanced and gives you so much evidence to, as I said, predict behavior. So falling into that journey back in Cardiff University, seeing the small successes that you can quickly build up on, just really interested me. So I started upskilling myself in that. So it's self-taught. A lot of behavioral scientists or applied practitioners are self-taught in practice. It's an emergent discipline, behavioral science, only been going popularized since the 80s. So there's loads of us who are applied across communications and other disciplines. But what is key, just like with comms, is CPD, is ensuring that you're reading up, not just on marketing type behavioral science. My advice would be to get into the behavioral science community, get into research papers, understand how behavioral science is being applied in policy, and try and see how you can take that and apply that into your practice.
A question from Giraji Dugoga. I hope I pronounced that right. Correctly, apologies if not. Can you share a couple of examples maybe of nudges and insights you've used in campaigns? You've given us examples already. And then I'm going to come on, there's a question as well from Steph Bridgman about is the application ethical?
Yeah. Oh, favorite question of mine. Absolutely. Yeah. Nudges and nudges. So everyone, there's a widespread belief that nudge is behavioral science. It's not. It's a subset of behavioral science. It's a suite of tactics specifically around choice architecture and how you present choices to individuals. The authors of the book Nudge, which I'm sure you've read, Cass and Richard, are very clear that nudge is meant to be for good. So Richard actually signs his book saying it's nudge for good. There are multiple nudges. Any type of persuasion tactic could be a nudge. So for example, putting a particular choice in front of an individual ahead of another choice could be a nudge. Putting a word in bold could be a nudge. Restructuring your choices in a certain way so individuals gravitate towards a specific choice to make it more salient to them is a nudge. There isn't a one size fits all. This is the entire point of behavioral science. Behavior change is about context. So research into local context is really important. Behavioral science suffers from a replication crisis. What works in one scenario may not work in another, may not work with the same scenario 6 months on. So it's really important to do your research and then to test, do your experiments to see what works, what doesn't, and then scale up. Does that hopefully answer your question?
Yeah, good question. Girijar has just provided me with a phonetic spelling of it, so I really appreciate that. Talk about the ethics then. Is it
ethics? Yeah. So every single talk, yes, ethics, a big issue. So science is science at the end of the day, and it is in the hands of the person applying that science. So absolutely, you can use it for good and you can use it for evil. We've seen it used for evil. If you look at the tactics applied in vote leave and the referendum, well, that is the vote leave, sorry, and Brexit, if you look at those where behavioral science tactics have been used for a particular agenda that is perhaps not the right outcome for the individuals. So absolutely can be used for evil, but the behavioral science community is absolutely geared towards an ethical approach. We are working through the ethics models. There is a nudge for good framework. There is a lot of discussions happening in the Bayside community about what ethics looks like. There's been a new association for behavioral scientists where ethics is starting to come into play. But yes, as with any science, you can use it for good, you can use it for evil. So it's up to you to ensure that you do it for the right purposes.
Talk to us about a question about the Housing Association campaign and how you increase response rates by 800%.
Choice architecture, essentially. There's a case study at Lynn PR, it's called Fair Rents, campaign for Bron Avon community housing in Wales. So we went in and they were mandated by the Welsh Government to conduct this survey, an annual survey, assessing tenants about their perceptions of rent charges and service charges. And this was bang in the middle of the pandemic, just as we're coming into the second wave. So obviously there were concerns that perhaps tenants wouldn't respond, or if they responded, they might conflate how the Housing Association had serviced them versus how they'd been impacted by the pandemic, rightly so. So it was our job to ensure that we framed the campaign in the right way and reminded the tenants of all the positive relationships that existed between them and the Housing Association. So they weren't conflating with COVID. So not only did we get 362 responses, which was 805% increase, baseline 40, but the quality of responses was really high as well.
Okay, thanks for that. Another question. Sorry, I'm just jumping through the questions here rapidly. Thanks everyone to ask questions. Is there a tension between using scientific approaches like this and the notion of the intuitive art of PR, of winning hearts and minds?
Yeah, really good question.
God, that's a big question.
Really good question. Yeah. So as PR practitioners, we all nudge. We do it instinctively. This is it. We use behavioral science tactics often without realizing it. Of course, putting something in bold or underlining something or putting a different color. Yes, you might know that you're doing it, but there's so much more that goes into behavioral sciences. I see around me all the time where people are doing it without the realization that they are doing it. And I suppose a behavioral science approach is knowing that you're doing it. So you're doing it with purpose as opposed to instinctively. So there is I don't think there is a tension. I think we are intuitively good at behavioral science. I think we intuitively know how to apply it, but we need to upskill our academic knowledge. So when we're applying it, we're doing it with purpose and reason, and we know how to assess the impact of those interventions.
Thank you very much, Shayoni. Time's up. Really appreciate you spending the time coming to talk to us, and you can tell by just the number of questions we've had. It's a very, very popular session. Thank you. Thank you. So now I'm going to welcome Naomi Jones to come and talk to us. We get lots of requests in feedback to WaddsCon for people to talk about ESG, and as we emerge from the pandemic, it's clearly front of mind for practitioners in corporate public relations. Naomi leads communications at Suez. It's the 12.6 billion euro market cap water waste and resource management company, and in that role she's absolutely at the sharp end of helping it navigate with these sorts of issues. Naomi, thanks for joining us. I'm going to get out of the way, and you've got a deck to share with us and talk through your experiences.
I do. Thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you for that introduction. So yes, everybody's talking about ESG and we all know what ESG is, but I wanted to give a couple of slides about the sort of how do you actually make this work and how do you do it properly? Because we didn't always. I'm really proud of some of the things we've done in the past. We've done a lot around the carbon agenda. We were the first company in the industry to embrace a sort of circular economy approach, but we also fell into some of the same traps that a lot of other companies do. Never, ever have we greenwashed, so that's something I'm really proud of, but we used a very much sort of campaign-led and sort of committee-led approach where we were doing some lofty sort of thought leadership stuff externally, and internally we were using some very gimmicky campaigns. It wasn't consistent, it wasn't done everywhere, great pockets of activity, but definitely not the way that we do things. And we decided we really wanted to move away from that and to more of an ESG-led approach, because we wanted to be measured, you know, we wanted to have governance and we wanted to do all of this properly. So something I get asked a lot is what term to use. And we work with both the public sector and the private sector. And we found that the public sector like to use sustainable development and social value as their terms, and the private sector have really embraced ESG. But, you know, the people who actually are going to make your ESG plans work are your employees. And this sort of language tends to turn them off. You know, they just want to keep it simple. Things like climate change are really, really difficult for us as people to see as a threat because we can't touch them. And then that's really important to get your head around when you're looking at sort of ESG with your employees. They've got to be able to think, how can I impact this? So the approach we took at my company was very much about making it something that was part of our DNA and making it sort of tangible for people and something they could relate to. And so how do you do that? It's not really about the naming, it's kind of how you do it. You've got to make it sort of business as usual. It's got to be a part of your culture, your purpose, your values. You've got to see it everywhere. It's just got to be about the way you do business. You have to focus on the same sort of amount of time on social as an environmental. You've got to have that governance. Your leadership have to be kind of breathing this and speaking about this constantly. They've got to be looking at everything that everyone's doing and making sure that it is as important in your business as anything else, but it has to be owned by your employees. So our 220 sites, it's the teams on the ground that own the how they do things. You know, we give the priority list, but they own it. And then you have to make sure you're kind of measuring. So where do you start? Okay, we very much, even though we've done a great amount of activity over the last 20 years, we decided to go right back to basics and look at talking to all of the people that we interacted with. We completely changed the way that we sort of surveyed and interacted with our customers on insight work, making ESG a fundamental part of that. And we went out and talked to employees. And that's quite an important sort of shift to kind of be aware of, that before all of your work around sort of environmental and social activity was about reporting and what you were doing as a company to kind of mitigate risk. And now it's about employees and customers asking you, what are you going to do to help me in this area? So, you know, to do that, you've got to understand where they're at. For us as well, our employees on the ground kind of knew how things were working, what would work, what wouldn't, what biodiversity action plans would work, what social partnerships. And so we did a lot of listening and a lot of gathering of that information. I'd really, really recommend assessing your current situation through something like a social value calculator, which if you don't know what one of those is, you basically input all of your data and it tells you for every pound that you're spending, what sort of you would be giving back to society with that pound. So for example, for us, for every pound that we spend on sort of our work with ex-offenders, it generates £4 of value sort of externally in society, because we keep our ex-offenders on a very long program, we promote them and develop them in the company, and therefore in theory your sort of the amount of money that society is paying on towards the police force and your defence systems should sort of come down from that. But the social value calculator really will throw up some surprises. So from us, it showed where we were kind of giving value and adding back in areas that we knew about, like carbon and recycling and reuse, but it also threw up some surprises and highlighted to us where we could do more and also where we could do better. That work will then enable you to define your priorities. And I'd really recommend involving people outside your leadership team in doing that, and make sure you keep it kind of, something that's manageable. So we have 10 priorities from which we have 44 sort of KPIs. The governance comes after that. It has to be, this is who we are. It's not sort of one bit of work that sits on its own. This has got to be integrated in everything else. So we made that governance and those KPIs part of all of the rest of our KPIs. Everything that you do is ESG. Once you've got the clear KPIs and measurement, you need to make sure that ownership is given locally. So every single one of our sites is in charge of how they make those 10 sort of principles and priorities work locally. And those are kind of measured by their line managers, et cetera, et cetera. The peer-to-peer support is absolutely crucial. So we have a sort of champion at every single site and a regional champion, and they have a lot of networks in which they kind of all talk to each other. And that sharing ideas is critical. Now, we haven't got everything perfect. So before you go external, you have to kind of do all of this, but I would really sort of, recommend you do a bit of an evaluation to see how things are landing, how you're doing. So we've just partnered with Jihan Hyde from Communique, who's an ESG specialist, and she's spending a lot of time now doing listening sessions within our company to see if we're doing as well as we think we are and what we still need to do better. And after that, then you go external. Then you sort of say, this is how we're doing things. Be really, really open and honest. If some things are not going as well as you think, or you've still got a way to go in your journey, just say. Much, much better to kind of be honest than not. And if there's anything that sort of COVID has shown us, is that it's very, very easy to see now where there's a real disconnect and gap between companies sort of saying what they're doing and actually doing on the ground. It's very obvious to see. So don't be worried about being open about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Do you want to, Naomi, do you want to close your deck and come and say hello? Naomi, questions straight away. I've just read Richard Walker's book, The MD of Iceland, who talked about the thing you touched on right at the end there. So he talks about Iceland's journey, but cites examples. There's 2 cases in particular where he hasn't met the market's expectations in terms of ESG goals and has suffered reputational impact. Do you think is that a historical issue? Is that you just said there, the market will not, if you're honest, the market will recognize the challenges you face. How do you balance that?
Yes, I mean, they'll definitely sort of recognize the challenges you face, but you obviously still have to deliver what you've promised. And I think that's why, for me, it's really, really important that you don't go external until you're really quite ready. And you can be quite confident that what you're sort of aiming to deliver is deliverable. So, we were talking last week, weren't we, Stephen, that the sort of the net zero targets that my company have had to shift by 5 years. But we purposely, therefore, not gone all out saying we are definitely going to deliver this until we've done all of our carbon sort of programs, got everything in place, and we kind of actually knew sort of where we were at. So yes, I think people will sort of believe you if you're kind of honest to a point, but I think that's why it's so important not to go external until you're pretty confident about how you're going to do things.
It was really interesting to see your almost the timeline and the literal journey that you've been on, the physical journey that you've been on. You put sort of the metrics was almost a midpoint within that. Whereas it strikes me a lot of organizations scrabble around looking for a set of metrics that will fit their organization and hammer their program into that.
Yes, I think it depends where you're at. I think we are very much a relationships-driven company and weren't that good at data. And I think we thought if we're going to put sort of bad data in, we'll get sort of bad data out. And so that sort of data analysis bit that we did in the social value calculate aspect, it took us 6 months because there was very poor data in some areas and we needed to pull that together. I just think, in order to have measurements that are going to work, you need to have a sort of process that works first, and it's important for us to sort of test that. So we did start to think early on what the kind of measurements would be, but we just didn't want to make definite decisions on that until we had got the sort of research done and the feedback from others as to what would work.
Related question, where can you find a social value calculator and what is it?
So there are companies out there that do it. So it's a government sort of introduced initiative. We use a company called Social Value UK. Very important to go with a sort of government approved body, but there are a series of sort of government approved organizations out there that will do the calculations for you. You can buy your own. You can make your own up. There are some tools out there that allow you to do that, but I would really advise using a sort of government approved one. And the reason being that they will use approved metrics that society at large uses, that our government departments use, and therefore you can be a bit more certain that the calculations will actually relate back to some metrics that are approved, in wider society.
Okay. Thorny question here from Joanna Fawkes up at Huddersfield Uni. Does paying proper tax dues count as a social, or I guess a governance contribution? Is ESG incompatible with tax avoidance? It's a very good question.
Oh, it is a very good question. I think it is. So our sort of social value calculator does include sort of, things that you have to do around sort of taxes. So yes, I would say, yes, it is. I think, if there's a sort of a tax avoidance happening, then obviously you've got some very big issues there that, you need to look at, very much as part of ESG and otherwise.
Okay, organisations starting out on their ESG journey, and you're in a comms role. Do you think is comms well placed to be part of these conversations? Because ESG is literally everything, right?
No, 100%, and we definitely were. So even though we didn't do the sort of internal comms aspect until stage 3, me and my team have been absolutely involved from the beginning. And sometimes, sustainability and ESG and everything around it and social value sit within comms, and sometimes not. So actually in my business, it doesn't. We have a separate team that looks after that, but we work absolutely in partnership and sort of develop the plan together from the start. So comms is part of the governance team, if you like, at my company, and is involved at every kind of single stage. And that's the same for other teams. You've got to have sort of procurement, HR, everything, finance, all involved right from the beginning. They've got to be part of that sort of governance.
So we're heading towards COP26 in Glasgow. That seems to be creating a huge wave of energy around this. And as you say, commitment to net zero.
Mm-hmm.
This issue is only going to get ladder and ladder for communicators, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think COP is like anything else. It's fantastic as long as what's being brought there is genuine and authentic and actually what people are doing, and there's no kind of spinning going on. But I think it's absolutely brilliant. I think it's fantastic that it's happening in Glasgow. I'm really pleased that's the sort of city that was chosen. And, having kind of, attended COP before, and we're kind of, having presence again, it's a great place to have the conversations. But those conversations have to be realised. It can't just be a talking shop.
To talk about net, so this commitment to net zero, and you've said you push your commitment back 5 years. Why is that so important as a goal?
I think it's important because, carbon is obviously one of the areas where, most companies can most influence. I mean, certainly, as an environmental services company for us, we know that our impact is greater than a lot of other companies, both in a negative and positive sort of way. But this is one of the biggest ways that business can kind of contribute, and you need to have a very sort of strong target. So you're not just looking at your emissions, but you're looking at your entire sort of impact in the carbon sense. So it's only really by all industries having kind of joint targets and all the companies within those industries having individual targets that we're going to kind of deliver it.
You've absolutely smashed it, as Asif has just said in the chat. Thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate your contribution to today's session. Thank you. Thanks. So we're going to say goodbye to Naomi. There's a storm brewing behind me. I don't know if you can the noise, but I keep going on mute. But we're going to say hello to Nigel Sarbutts. Nigel is an agency head turned freelancer turned tech entrepreneur. He's built a platform called the PR Cavalry to connect freelancers with agencies and brands. He's here today, though, to talk about the market for freelancers as we emerge from COVID. Nigel, are you there? You're there. Hello.
I am. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Good. Right, so let me do the screen share thing. There it is. And share. Can you see that? Do the screen share. There we go. Right. Is that good? Are we good? You're on mute, Stephen, so I'll assume you can see that.
Sorry, you're good. I'm on mute.
Yeah, good.
Okay.
Right, okay, so 5 minutes, rough guide to PR freelancing. Paul started with a quiz, so I'm going to ask you a question. Anybody want to give me an estimate of the freelance PR market in the UK? Give me a number. Anybody? Well, I can't see the responses, so I'll give you the figure. 825 million. That is our estimate of the market for freelance PR services, which is drawn from triangulating off ONS data on what freelance PRs at a senior level charge per annum, and the CIPR, PRCA surveys each year on the number of freelancers in the market. So it's probably a bit bigger than you thought. There are many thousands out there. This huge talent pool. And it's my theory, what I'm going to argue today is that the market doesn't really value it in any sensible way. I come from PR. I've run 3 agencies. I've been in PR all my career, so I've got some ability to say this, or some right to say this. That I think PR thinks it's a modern, agile kind of sector, but I don't think it is. I think if you look at even an industry like movie making, has been using freelancing as a model for literally decades. It's built around the idea of bringing talent together. Or even industries that perhaps we see as quite staid or conservative, engineering, construction. They are decades ahead of the PR market in the way that they bring talent together. And that in a world where everything is now hired or rented rather than owned, talent should be the same. And if your attitude to talent is still around, we need to own these people, we need to own these skills and have them on the payroll, then you are decades behind other industries. And probably if you're talking to clients and kind of masking the fact that you're using freelancers, then they may wonder why you're doing that, because it's how they are operating. And talent is PR's biggest cost, it's its biggest headache. But I think that adopting this kind of we have to have these people on the payroll attitude is clearly long out of date, and I think it's something that needs to change. I get a lot of calls from people saying, we need some freelancers in here, and a phrase I hear very often is, we need legs, not brains. We just need to get some media hits. The client is being is getting a bit angry as a result, so we just need to up the media hits. And that's completely the wrong attitude to approach this, because what you're going to do is magnify the problem, not solve it, simply by kind of taking the same attitude. So thinking about freelancing in a more strategic way is where the value is. And I think you're going to behavioral science, Abram Kaplan, give a boy a hammer and suddenly everything needs pounding, is one of his phrases. And we have this thing called the problem of the instrument, is that if you have the same skills walking through your door every Monday morning, then you are going to be selling the same solutions to clients time after time after time. And that's the antithesis of marketing theory, which is marketing 101. Sell what people are buying, not what you can produce. And so adopting an attitude to flexible talent, which says, okay, well, rather than just selling what the team is able to produce, why don't we start looking at what the client is looking for and find the talent that can deliver that? And it's a very volatile market out there. I think, you know, the volatility in the market comes in three ways. There's volatility in time, that fees are moving backwards and forwards on the spreadsheet a lot, but also it's volatile in nature, that the nature of what clients are asking agencies to deliver, or their internal teams to deliver, is becoming much more volatile. You know, back in the day, it was always media relations. 90% of your budget probably went on media relations. The budget may be the same, but the nature of what goes into that campaign is now probably maybe 50% media relations. The rest of it is content creation, video, paid social, influencer marketing, a whole bunch of things. And if you've got the same skill sets walking through the door on a Monday morning, then you know you are simply unable to meet that volatility. I think that freelancers allow you to meet and anticipate demand in a way that's risk or lower risk. You know, it's very difficult to diversify the team that you have on your payroll, because you're going to need to retrain them, which is going to take a long time, or you're going to have to hire different sorts of people and presumably get rid of people. So, you know, having access to freelance talent gives you an ability to meet that volatility in a much more strategic way. It allows you to experiment with new revenue streams. To, you know, if you find that 10% of your client demand was in influencer marketing last year, but suddenly it's 15% and you think it could be 20-25% next year, then you know this is a way to experiment with new revenue streams, to expand what you're serving the market. And then the final thought around freelancers is around what I call the freelancer's superpower, which is their embrace of risk. The thing about freelancers is that they totally get risk in a way that clients love, that they are leaning into that because, you know, they don't have the certainty of income. They don't have the certainty of, you know, what their client mix is going to be each month, each quarter. And they embrace that. And that gives them their energy. It's their fuel source. And if you think of freelancers as simply people that, you know, will come in and sort out a job and then go away again, you're overlooking that immense energy source. And I think of freelancers of bringing that kind of new car smell back into a campaign, that they re-energize, that they can give different perspectives on an existing campaign, give different perspectives on an existing team structure. And they also bring something that is highly valuable beyond their skills, which is their network. Every freelancer lives and dies on their black book of networks, the people that they know that you can connect them with. So bringing a freelancer into your team for a few months or whatever is bringing that value of their networks, of them knowing how to solve a problem by referring to somebody that they trust. So, you know, if you have 10 people walking through your door in your payroll, you have 10 networks. They're networks, and they don't change very often. But if you bring a number of different people in over time, you are bringing in, you know, 10, 20 different black books of networks and capabilities into the business. And then they challenge, they invigorate, and, you know, they are there to be a spark, to take a campaign a different direction rather than simply add some legs to it. So take those three things together, of the move towards the mega trend of skills being something that you hire rather than buy, that mega trend of being able to adopt a completely different way of meeting volatile customer need, and that immense energy that freelancers bring to a problem. And then you have three hugely valuable ways to think about talent, or you can do what a lot of people do and just think of them as people to help with the selling. I would say that the choice is probably the small one, which is the first one. So that's my 5 minutes. I'm happy.
Brilliant. Nigel, that's brilliant. Do you want to shut your deck down and say hello? Sorry, I'm going to shout through the storm at myself in the middle of on the river. Brilliant. So an £825 million market, that's the headline, but that's treated as a commodity by the industry rather than recognizing its strategic value.
Yeah, it's seen as a tactical contribution. There is a company out there called Stopgap Resourcing. And if you think about all of those skills, and a lot of people go into freelancing when they've got 5, 10 plus years experience. So that the talent pool is not only huge, it's also very experienced. So thinking of them as people that can just kind of lend a hand and expand the team a bit when you've got some illness or you've got holidays or whatever, is just ignoring their capabilities of, tend to be more senior. And people that have got all those strategic skills but have stepped off the agency carousel very often because they don't want to be agency managers. They want to do. They want to be at the coalface. They want to be talking to clients, talking to the media, influencing campaign strategy. So just thinking of them as people, glorified postmen who can just send stuff out and follow it up in the ways an account exec would, is just, a ridiculous waste of resource.
We're getting lots of questions about mainly practical stuff. I've got one though here. Are we in a boom at the moment for freelance market? I mean, it strikes me the headline from the CIPR PR in a pandemic report that's published this week is a fifth of practitioners have changed roles during the pandemic, and many of those have gone into an independent, not because of circumstance, but because of the absolute choice. Is this becoming an increasingly popular move, do you think?
Well, I mean, certainly our business is, the volumes are going up every month. So, speaking from my own perspective, our business perspective, the demand is increasing. Hard to know. I mean, I feel that the mega trend is away from retainer, much more project orientation, which lends itself to freelance support. So, I think that, I talk to a lot of new agencies, and I think very few agencies are setting up around the pyramid model of the owner at the top and lots of worker bees at the bottom. Most of the agencies, startups that I'm talking to, they are building networks of freelancers. They're much more around agile, flexible talent rather than rigid structures, because most people go into PR because they have a desire to run campaigns, to see their name in print, whatever the motivation is. Very few people, I don't know of anybody who goes into PR because they want to manage a spreadsheet of resource allocation. And that's, I think, a lot of agencies have got very tied up on that, of selling hours, and therefore they get very strung up in resource allocation spreadsheets, and it can be crucifying. It can be very depressing if that's what your job is as an associate director or a senior account director, where you're just moving resource and utility around on a spreadsheet, when actually what you want to do is get in amongst the clients and advise them and lead and take them on a journey.
You said in the movie industry, the film industry, all the disciplines have a much more positive outlook to freelancers.
Yeah.
Several people have asked, is the word an issue, freelancer? Should we call ourselves consultants?
Yeah, I mean, I was a freelancer for many years, and sometimes I was an independent consultant, sometimes I was, I don't know what it was, but I think going back to my slide around marketing 101, sell what clients are buying. People, it's a simple term. People know what it means. I think it does get associated with the gig market, which is a phrase I really dislike. The gig market in terms of Uber, Deliveroo, stuff like that, where you've got very commoditized labor, is something that we as a business want to be absolutely a million miles away, 180 degrees away from that. And I think most freelancers would see themselves as experts in a field. So whether they call themselves freelancers, I don't know. Blunt advice, get over it. Clients talk about, and we need freelance support. So call yourself what clients are buying, rather than what you'd like to term yourself.
60 seconds for a pitch for PR Cavalry. How's it work?
We're like booking.com for employers looking for expert freelance talent. We have 1,800 or so freelancers registered on our platform. Clients go on and say, I need somebody who knows the pet food sector, and it's a CSR brief with some CEO profiling. So basically we match by how well does the freelancer know not only the market, but how relevant is their experience in that market to the brief. And our financial model is that employers don't pay to use our platform. The freelancer pays us a small commission, smaller than some of our competitors, 10% of the fee for the value that we create in bringing the work to them that is highly matched to their skill set. So it's more profitable work that finds them so they can spend more time billing clients and less time hunting for clients.
Perfect, within 60 seconds. Nigel, thanks for presenting your session today. That brings us to a close. As ever, we finish on the hour. We'll follow up today with a replay link and evaluation form. Grateful for your feedback. WaddsCon's taking a break for the summer, but we're going to be back in the autumn. It just leaves me to thank today's speakers. Thanks to Paul, Shayoni, Naomi, and Nigel. Thanks to you for taking part and joining us. And wherever you are today, whatever you're doing, stay safe and have a great weekend. Thank you.
See ya.
See you guys. Bye.